everyone. This is the Green Party of Washington's Candidate 101 Forum. And we have Mike Feinstein, who's been elected to the City Council and Mayor of Santa Monica, California, joining us. We might have another guest later who was elected to the Madison, Wisconsin City Council. We're hoping that Brenda Conkle can join us. We don't know if she's able to today, but we have her on the agenda. We hope to see her. And we have a number of Green Party activists and other former candidates and others who are interested in running for office and supporting candidates who are running. So conversation today will be about how to run for office in a really broad overview and why to run for office. That's kind of one of the biggest questions. Why do we want to run for office, and who could run for office? What can we accomplish both in running for office and in getting elected to office? So we want to raise some questions and get people thinking about why we want to run for office and what we can do once if we can actually be seated in one of these positions locally in one of our cities or counties or other local jurisdictions. What can we accomplish? So we want to get a lot of perspective from Mike, who's been there, and take questions and comments and all sorts of other input from others who are attending, and we will take it from there. So I'm Lisa. I've been organizing with the Green Party Washington for about 4 or 5 years. I'm mostly doing behind the scenes kind of admin work, and now I'm serving as a treasurer. And we have some, I'll kind of go around real quick and introduce folks. Everyone can say something real quick, and then we will turn it over to Mike, who can talk for a while. So we have a few other organizers from the Green Party here and other of our local chapters. So Jody, Margaret, Stony, Starlene, Daniel have all been kind of in leadership roles with our chapters. And then we have some other Greens locally here, like Amber and Jillian, and others who are attending the call too from out of state. So why don't we just really quick, I'll go send it over to Margaret, just say a couple words about where you are and what you do with the Green Party, and then we'll circle back to Mike. Okay, go ahead, Margaret.
Sure thing. Thank you, Lisa. My name is Margaret Elizabeth. I am one of the co-chairs of the Green Party of the United States. I am the chair of the Green Party of Washington, and I am a co-chair of the Lavender National Green Caucus. Those are a lot of things and a lot of words. I'm really happy to have become involved with the Green Party and gotten engaged at the national level, and to have been able to be in a position to earn the trust of my colleagues and to have their support on many of the initiatives that we've taken, changing bylaws, improving our social media perspective, and things like that. I'm really honored to have a chance to host a Campaigning 101 seminar where we can talk about how you run for office, why it's a good thing, if you want to be a campaign staffer, how do you do that? How do you help, like a campaign? So this is really great because we're really trying to do a grassroots effort to get Greens into office. And that means, most of us have never done it before. We really don't know what to do. And so having an opportunity to talk to a Green who's not only done it, but won it multiple times, I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And so thank you, Mike, for being here with us today.
Okay, and then Margaret, go ahead, call someone else, and
oh my God, okay, that was me. Okay, I totally dropped the ball. So let me go over to Starlene. Hi, Starlene.
Hi, Margaret. Thank you. And thank you, Lisa. I'm Starlene Rankin. I'm in Kent, Washington, currently working as a part-time organizer for the state party, the Green Party of Washington, formerly a staff member for the National Party, and a longtime Green going back to 1996 when I helped to found the Iowa Green Party with Holly Hart, who is also here today. And I'm really excited to see what Michael's got to say, and hopefully Brenda, if she's able to make it. Mike's one of the first Greens I ever met in 1997, back in Lawrence, Massachusetts, at what we used to call the Green Gatherings, which were these wonderful gatherings we'd have once a year. And so I know he's very knowledgeable and has tons of experience, and is going to be passing on a lot of great information to us all. Okay, that's it. Let's go to Daniel.
Hello, I'm Daniel Baumbarger. I am the secretary for the Green Party of Washington, also a member of the accreditation and fundraising committees at the national level, and a proud member of both the NLGC and the Young Eco-Socialists. So hello, and I'm in Olympia, Washington.
Pick someone.
Pick someone.
I will pick Lisa.
I already introduced myself. I'm going to spin it up.
I will pick Stony.
Hi, I'm Stony Bird. I'm based in Bellingham, Washington. I've been more or less active with the Washington Green Party since about 2010. I served briefly on the coordinating committee of the Washington Greens and ran for Congress as a Green in 2018. Since then, I haven't so much focused on Green Party stuff and instead have focused on ranked choice voting, which I figure will be of some significance for Green candidates.
Thanks, Tony. Let's see, Jody's here. Jody, do you want to say a couple sentences? A couple words?
Oh, you're muted, Jody.
I'm in Seattle. I'm on the, I'm serving now as the deputy treasurer. I have been active at the national level too as an at-large member of the steering committee, as well as treasurer and secretary. I think that's it.
Thanks, Jody. Okay, Jody, you want to call on someone?
Oh, yes. I'm going to call on Julian. Jillian.
Hi, I'm kind of at the opposite end of the experience scale here. I joined the Green Party in November. There was a time in a different country when I had a different gender, when I was very involved in the Labour Party in Britain, including working to get candidates elected to local and national office. But that was a very long time ago, and I haven't really been involved for a long time. So I'm back in the saddle. Here I am. And let's see, Christopher.
Hello, my name is Christopher Lozinski. I run greenmaps.us. The reason I'm here is I have a template so I can put up a web page or even a website for any candidate in a few minutes. And I also run uncensorednews.us. There's a huge problem with censorship and propaganda, just off the charts. Many people don't realize it. So if your media committee needs some help, I'd love to engage with you. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. We haven't heard from Jules. Jules, do you want to say a word?
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We can.
Thank you so much. I'm just down the road from you guys. I'm on Lake Erie in Ohio, but I don't know why I'm here. Well, I know why I'm here, because I love everything green, and I can't offer you any fact that I've been with, elections or anything, but I have voted for Ralph Nader, twice for Jill Stein, and once for Howie. So I'm dedicated. But I just love to hear what you folks have to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Okay, Veronica, welcome. We're so happy to have you here. And you could say a couple words about who you are, because we know a little bit, but a lot of people might not know you're running for office. Go ahead.
My name is Veronica Fimbres, and I'm the first transgender officer in the history of the city and county of San Francisco, where I actually live. I served as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs for 14 years and 8 months. And I'm running for Insurance Commissioner for the state of California currently. And I'm glad to be here.
Running as a Green.
Of course. Is there anything else?
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. Okay, let's see. let's see, Amber, are you still there? Do you want to pop back in? If you want to, you can unmute. And Melody, I see you there. If you want to unmute and say hi, you can, or if you don't, that's fine. Melody and Amber are both here in Washington State, and Holly is here. We know Holly's in Iowa. Do you want to say a couple things? Did you already? Do you want to say a word?
I'll just say hello. I'm here. I work with the Coordinated Campaign Committee, currently one of the co-chairs. And so I'm just always on the lookout for good material for advice and campaign advice and stuff. And this looks really good. So thank you for allowing visitors.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Well, let's turn it over to Mike. Mike has a long history with the Green Party, as we've already been saying, and I think everyone kind of knows a little bit about where Mike's been. So I'll just turn it over and let Mike go ahead and share some words of wisdom about running and getting elected and then, accomplishing things once you're there.
That's true. All right. Thanks to everybody for having me, honoring me to be part of your event today. And with Starlene, I go back with her to 1997. I had the privilege of serving on the National Party Steering Committee with Jody, and now have also had the pleasure of working with Margaret on our national committee in her role as a steering committee member, and with Holly in many ways, and I'm supporting Veronica's campaign, working with Christopher on his website, and happy to meet the rest of you. I've been a Green since November 1988, when I went to the Findhorn Foundation in Scotland, to a conference called The Individual and the Collective, Politics as if the Whole Earth Mattered. And that connected spirituality and politics for me. There were several speakers from European Green parties who were present at the time, including Jonathan Porritt, who was the spokesperson for the Green Party of what was then called the Green Party of the UK. And it got me really excited. And I was reading Charlene Spretnak's book, Green Politics, The Global Promise, at the same time. And by Charlene and Fritjof Capra, which had been a study of the German Greens in Parliament in 83, 84, 85, when they first got in, and what it was like to be Greens on that level of government. At the end of that book, there were contacts for Greens in the United States. And when I came back from Findhorn, I gave a call to Bob Long, who was in San Pedro. He used to publish what was called Green Synthesis. It was one of our kind of our political theoretical publications for the budding Green movement at the time. And he got me connected to local Greens. And I've been involved ever since, helped start our state party, ran for elected office, and been active on many levels. When I was elected in 1996 and reelected in 2000, at that time, Santa Monica, California, where I was elected, was the largest city in the United States where we had elected a city council member. And to this day, I think it is the second largest city still in which a Green has won an at-large election. We've won district elections in much larger cities, Milwaukee, San Francisco, and others. But in terms of a citywide election, mine was the largest at the time. And then Gail McLaughlin got elected in Richmond in Northern California, which was larger by a little than Santa Monica. So it's pretty high level and a pretty big deal. And because of the real estate costs in Santa Monica and how much money there is to be made on decisions by the city council, running for office there is really competitive and really high stakes. So in some ways, it was one of our biggest accomplishments ever to win a seat there and then to win it a second time. And then when I was reelected in 2000, I was chosen mayor by the council in a 7-0 vote. And at that time, we had 2 Greens out of 7 on the council and 5 Democrats. So how did it happen? First thing, and then, what can you learn for your own candidates? The first thing is your record and your reputation in the community. Before you run, ideally, you've been involved. And you've been involved in a way where you've laid a record about what issues you stand for, how good your word is, what kind of time you are willing to put in, how you can work with other people. And obviously there's a variety of ways of doing that, but to run and win in an area that is larger than a very small community where everybody just knows you in person, it's really good if you've served on some sort of board or commission or otherwise been in some leadership role on a community issue. So often there are neighborhood organizations where you live. Have you ever been involved in your neighborhood organization? Have you been on the board of directors there? That's an important place to start because you're going to meet people from different political viewpoints, have to start testing out your worldview with other people who may or may not agree with you. And that's an important personal maturation process and important for other people to start gauging and seeing what you're about. Then there are appointed boards and commissions by your local government, like Veronica was before in San Francisco. Getting on an official government body, a housing commission, a recreation and parks commission, a social services commission. Sometimes there are time-limited task forces. Getting appointed to those also is really critical to start laying a record in your community and something that you can include in your campaign literature. To say, look, I'm already a social services commission member, and now I'm running for this and that, and point to that. It also gives you some experience with working with the local government, which is really important because if you've never worked with the system, it's going to come out when you're running for office. People are going to ask questions, and you're just going to shoot from the hip, and you're not really going to know enough for people to trust their vote. They might like your issues, but they may not trust you with your vote. So it's really important to have that kind of record. And then at the same time, what are the opportunities to speak on politics before the community? You should be attending community meetings where your local government is seeking public input on the issues. Maybe there's a project in the neighborhood where the developer has to seek input about how does this housing project fit in with the existing housing around, or what are the goals for the park? What uses should go into the new park that's going to come in your neighborhood? What parts of the community should it be serving? Or a whole range of different possibilities. So attending these local meetings that are hosted by your local government, and that does three things. One, it informs you. Two, it gives you a chance to speak when there's time for public input, so people know where you're coming from. And three, that's where people who are active are showing up. So they're going to see that you're putting in the time, and you're going to be there and chatting with them. And you're going to start knowing everybody. And when staff is in front talking, you're in the back row and commenting, what do you think about this or that, et cetera, et cetera. So that all of that together is really, really important to lay a record out of where you're coming from. Then, if your local community has its political meetings televised on local cable TV, which is the case in most places around the United States, now you're broadcasting to everybody who is at home. So if you're going to your city council or your school board or rent board meeting, any of those that are televised, you got your 2 minutes, your 3 minutes, however much time, and you're going and speaking, and now it's being broadcast to everybody at home. That's critically important, and not just doing that when it's campaign season, but having a record of having done that for a few years in advance. Those times when you're speaking publicly, also, you can take those videos, download them from your city website, and turn those into social media product. So, then you can share them around. It's like, this is what I said on this and that issue. And usually when you're speaking, it'll say underneath your name, meeting of the so-and-so city council. So it's got a nice graphic there. It makes you look credible. So all those different ways of laying out a record first are critically important. And obviously that fits in different ways in your community. For me, when I got elected in November 1996, in 1989 and 1990, in my neighborhood of Ocean Park, which is as the name suggests, a neighborhood right at the beach in Santa Monica, we have a main commercial street called Main Street. And I was on what was called the Main Street Advisory Committee that had 17 people. That was a mix of merchants, property owners, and residents. And we debated the uses and the design of Main Street going forward. And we ended up approving changing it from 4 lanes of traffic to 2 lanes and bike lanes in both directions. and on-street parking. So it was a traffic calming method that certainly brought in a green aspect of having public transit, and it required the agreement of the business owners and the property owners and the business owners. So I was on that committee, and city staff, which was of course there to staff the committee. So that was a case when I started out where, you know, I was working with a lot of really serious players. It's a very pricey street, and you know, taught me how the system works, etc. So that was one way that I laid a record out in the community. Then a couple of years later, how many of you have heard of the RAND Corporation? A few of you? Okay, good, about a third. The RAND Corporation was started as a nonprofit wing of the Defense Department after World War II. It stands for Research and Development, and they're located in Santa Monica, and their headquarters was a block from the beach in our Civic Center area. And when the wall came down in Eastern Europe, RAND had been primarily doing defense industry, nonprofit studies, analysis, etc. And since the spending on that went down when the wall came down, then they were looking at a way to enhance their endowment. And they owned property in our Civic Center, and our Civic Center actually did not have zoning. So we launched on a public process to zone the area, and RAND, of course, wanted to cash out and make a lot of money. So they were lobbying to have a big commercial office project and to change their old building to an 84-foot high office building right across from City Hall, which would have cast a big shadow over our local City Hall, both literally and in some ways, those of us thought politically. So there was a referendum ultimately by the residents against the project that the council approved by a 7-0 vote, all Democrats. And in that movement to gather the signatures and oppose that zoning for that area, I was heavily involved, and the local Greens, our local West Side Greens chapter, was heavily involved. And we got the signatures and forced it on the ballot, and I was the acknowledged community leader, although there were many of us and many people who had a longer record in the slow growth movement than I did, but I was the person who was the public face. Los Angeles Times Magazine did a big Sunday piece on it, and I was featured along with one of the council members who had voted to approve the project. So I gained a high profile from that work citywide, and I was identified with the slow growth movement in town and the idea that public land should be used for public purposes. So in 2 years later, in 1996, when I ran for city council, I had that reputation, and a lot of people that I had worked with on that issue and in that movement were then interested to work on my campaign. So that was the big deal. And all that is to say that you can certainly run for office and just have a few nice things to say and good ideas, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to win, you have to have a community record. And by that time, I had a 5 to 6 year record. Also with the West Side Greens, our local, we had a West Side Greens public forum series where we were getting 200 to 300 people turning out during the founding years of the California Greens between 1990 and 1992. And also I had made a reputation that way. So now in 96, I choose to run, and we have at-large elections, and there were 4 seats open, and there were 13 candidates for 4 seats. And there was a left of center coalition and a center right coalition. The center right coalition was backed by developers, property owners, realtors, apartment owners, etc. And then the left of center was a tenants' right, local environmentalist, that kind of coalition. And there were, people were a little skeptical of me in 1994 because I had opposed the council members that had been backed by the left of center coalition. But given that we were so strong, we didn't win the referendum because Rand outspent us by $250,000 to 5,000 at the time. But there had been so much political organizing that a whole lot of people came in, and it was clear that if the left of center wanted to win, I needed to be on the slate. And in particular, in Santa Monica, we have a group called Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights, which is a tenants' rights organization. It's very successful. It brought rent control into Santa Monica in 1979, and it has a large direct mail campaign. And therefore, in a community that has about 65 to 70% renters, the Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights, or SMR, endorsement is critical. So the council members who had been backed by SMR before in 94 were skeptical of me. 96, they realized like, this guy probably needs to be on our slate. So I had a lot of people join SMR who either renewed or hadn't been a member because they had been disgusted by the Civic Center project. They came in and I won the convention. There were 4 seats up. We endorsed 3 people, myself and 2 others, and I actually overwhelmingly won the convention there. So that was a big piece. The second piece, however, was labor. Santa Monica being a beach community, there are a lot of luxury hotels, and those had been approved. The zoning had been changed in the early 1980s when SMR took control of the council because it wanted to make money from the bed tax to pay for social services, to expand the left of center righteous, let's do more for people in the community, for our seniors, for our youth, etc. So when those hotels came in, now they were operating with a de facto monopoly by having these great location right at the beach, but they weren't paying their hotel workers well. There was only one union at the time in our 5 luxury beach hotels, and the company that owned that hotel, which was the Miramar Sheraton, was moving to break the union, which was mostly Central American women immigrants who were doing the hard work of working in that hotel. And their endorsement was also going to be very important. So interestingly, there was a state of Washington connection there where Steve Hill, who then was living in Washington State and working with the United Farm Workers and then had moved to California, he's a proportional representation expert. I was working with him in California, and he knew Kurt Peterson, who is now the leader of the local HERE Hotel Workers Union. At the time, Kurt had moved from Washington State down to LA, and Steve got Kurt and I together, and we talked, and it was clear that I was on the side of the workers there and wanted to work to try and help them unionize there. And thus I ended up having their endorsement as well. Now, why did all of that matter? The SMR endorsement did direct mail. So that meant the tenants knew, since I was endorsed, that I was on their side on renters' rights, on tenants' rights. And the hotel workers staffed the phone bank. And there was a combination together with the hotel workers and the renters' rights group at the hotel workers union hall, where there was phone banking to residents. So having the endorsement of both of them actually, gave me this massive political machine that was going to be doing that kind of outreach. And then the question is, what else would I bring to it myself? I was a champion of increasing parks and open space in the community, not surprising as a Green. Santa Monica is a very dense community and was lacking in open space. Our ratios of open space per resident are way lower than other places. And if we're going to take that kind of density in our community, we needed to have more open space. So I already started with the base from SMR. The hotel workers expanded that. And then my open space and parks record also attracted people who were not necessarily left of center. But that's just a local community issue. And as many of you know, what is left and right on the national political spectrum is not necessarily the same in your local community. There, it's local quality of life. So being the champion that I was, wanting to expand the amount of public open space, to take public funds and buy more land and create more open space, got a lot of people interested in me, even if they weren't necessarily on board with a living wage and renters' rights. So that expanded my base. So my green environmental background expanded. And then there was also the issue of homelessness. Santa Monica was very homeless friendly. When Ronald Reagan cut the funding for mental health care, and we saw in the 1980s, and we saw a great increase of homeless folks on the street, Santa Monica at the beginning took people in. It was very, very open and very supportive. But in 1994, we had a backlash, which people locally called homeless fatigue. That was the same year that the Republicans had their Newt Gingrich Republican revolution in Congress and took over the House for the first time in 40 years. And we had the same dynamic in Santa Monica, where the center right won 2 of the 3 seats for council in the 94 election, which was the first time that had happened since the mid 70s. So in that environment, there was a lot of pressure on me to avoid the homelessness issue or just, avoid it. What I decided is if I was going to run for office, I was going to run on a progressive platform and see what happened. I wasn't going to just lie about who I was. I was going to just say, let's see what happens, not put my finger to the winds, but just be honest and see what I was about. What did that end up having? Where did that lead? When you're honest, it's something that is so not frequent enough in politics that a lot of people who, again, were not maybe as left of center as I was, were willing to vote for me because they just said, look, you say what you're for. And we appreciate that. And I would go to their meetings, I would go to their block parties, I would show up even if they weren't necessarily going to be my so-called voters. So that was a big deal. The second thing is, because I was compassionate for people on the street, and obviously a lot of people end up on the street for a lot of tough reasons. Domestic violence, substance abuse, military, people who are suffering from PTSD from military experience, etc. And the word on the street is a lot of the women in the community especially voted for me because I was compassionate. And they were like, okay, this person is compassionate with the homeless in the community. And that speaks to where he is at as a person. So, just being openly progressive worked. People thought I was honest. They appreciated that. And that expanded my base beyond what I would have had just with the endorsements. I'll get into a little bit more of the mechanics of my campaign, but I want to say that ultimately what happened then is with the 13 candidates for 4 seats, I finished second of the 13 candidates. And on election day, I finished first. I only finished second because the one conservative incumbent who won, Asha Greenberg, finished ahead of me with absentee votes. And she did that back then. You may recall people weren't voting by mail as much as they are today. And absentees were a more conservative dynamic demographic, but also my campaign was just getting started at the time. So people didn't know me as much then. But even so, I finished ahead of the other 2 SMER-backed council members who got elected. And it was pretty remarkable. So how does that happen? Well, number one, we went door to door, myself and my team, to about 10,000 homes. I had good literature, and it's really important to have professional literature, to have a union bug, to have the recycling symbol on it as well, and then to get it out door to door. And the team I had, in part, was formed, the Greens, where I lived in Los Angeles in 1996, put on our first presidential convention. We didn't have a national party at the time, but our first presidential convention ever for the 96 Nader LeDuc team was at UCLA. And we had a great team that put on the convention. And then those folks stayed on and were the base for my campaign committee. Doug Heller, who now works for Consumer Watchdog, and Consumer Watchdog is actually a group that Veronica is taking some of her insights for on regulating the insurance industry. Doug ran my precinct operation, and between myself and others, we went to 10,000 homes. Ben Allen, who is now our state senator, was an 18-year-old high school senior at the time, and he was walking door to door for me, and that's how he got his original political experience as well. So going door to door, I was the only candidate who went door to door in 1996. All the other incumbents just depended on money and direct mailers and phone calls, and that distinguished me, and that bumped me up ahead of some of these folks. People were like, wow, nobody comes to talk to me. So what do you do when you go door to door? Number one, you hold out your piece of literature. First of all, give people their space. Even before COVID, if people are going to come to the door, it's somebody they don't know. You can't just stick your nose right into their face. It's not okay. So stand back, reach out. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm running for city council. Hold out your piece of literature. Now shut up for a moment, because you want to give them a chance to look at your literature. Some people will just take a quick look, turn it over. Sometimes they'll take it, a little bit longer and look at it. Let them do that. Then sometimes they'll say, okay, thank you. I'll think about it. And then you're done. Don't be pushy. But then, you have to read the moment, read the crowd there. And in a lot of cases, you then say, what are the issues that you care about in our community? Not I'm so-and-so pushing this and that, but what do you care about? And give them a chance to talk and listen. And then sometimes it's something you've never thought about. You're now learning what's on the street. And when you do that, that also helps you to form your future direct mail pieces, because you're going to go into the campaign knowing some issues, but you're going to learn other issues from people as you're going door to door. And engage them. Go ahead. Some people walk door to door with a walk list that only has you're only going to talk to Democrats, or you're only going to talk to frequent voters. I decided that year in 96, because I was new and kind of going against the system a bit. I went door to door to everybody. You don't always have that. And sometimes you just have to have a walk list and pick where you can go to and who you can talk to. But I went to everybody, and it was overwhelmingly important to do that. So that made a big difference. Then my campaign consultant, and it's really important to have somebody who will do your direct mail and work on your messaging. As a candidate, you're going to want to talk too long, too much, and you can't boil your stuff down to a couple of short phrases. You need a professional who can take what you're for and figure out how to put it into short messages that fit on a small piece of literature and into your direct mail. Then they have to know how to print, get direct mail printed and off to the mail houses and sent out in time. And when is important to get stuff sent out. You're getting something sent out to the early, most likely voters who will vote by direct mail. If you miss that, you've missed a good portion of the voters, and that percentage is increasing. So your person who is your campaign consultant needs to know that and be prepared and get out an early piece to those early voters. And then who are you going to target with what piece? In 96, I was endorsed by Ralph Nader. I was one of the people actually in November 1995, along with Greg Jan in the Green Party in California, and Rob Hager, who was one of Ralph's staff, who negotiated with Ralph in 95 to get him to decide to run as a Green in the first place. So Ralph and I already had a relationship, and he formally endorsed me. He came to Santa Monica. He did an event at Santa Monica College. We had some pictures together. Well, we sent out a direct mail piece to seniors, was it 50 to 65? I think it was 50 to 65-year-old Democrats at the time. I mean, to Greens as well, but 50 to 65-year-old Democrats with this picture of Ralph endorsing me. At the time, this was before Florida in 2000, any of the backlash against Ralph. So at that time, if you were a senior, you'd remember Ralph Nader unsafe at any speed in the 1960s. It was a big deal. So, for example, we sent that direct mail piece to that group and other direct mail pieces to other people. It's a big deal. You really want a professional who can do that. And, you may not be able to afford it, but at least you want to talk to somebody up front and get some sort of estimate about what it would cost to do that. So all of those pieces together, going door to door, having good direct mail, having laid a community message, having, a whole team of enthusiastic people, and having a record in the community, all of those together. And then the other big endorsement I got was the Sierra Club. In Los Angeles, we had these large wetlands called the Bayona wetlands. And there was a big project that LA City Council approved for that area called Playa Vista, which was going to be a giant commercial office park and high-end condo development on wetlands. And local Greens were already part of the coalition to save all of Bayona. I was part of that. Other Greens were as well. And that was a big issue for the local Sierra Club. So when you have the Sierra Club endorsement, now that's something that goes on your literature. It's nice to say you're an endorsement, or that you are an environmentalist, but to be able to say endorsed by the Sierra Club. And I think I was also endorsed by League of Conservation Voters at the time as well. So I had a record on that issue with Playa Vista, et cetera. So all of those together were gave me something to put on my literature. Oh, and one other thing, the police and fire unions, big time in Santa Monica, big, very powerful. Santa Monica police have in their contract that they have to be number 1 or number 2 with Beverly Hills of the highest paid in all of our, what are called comparable cities. All cities have some sort of dynamic where they compare their pay schedule with cities that are similar. So there's a lot of money in our police union. Their endorsement was really powerful, and they had knocked out one of the left of center members of the council in 1994. So people were afraid of them because that guy had also been relatively pro-homeless, Tony Vasquez, and they took him out. Well, before I ran, the year before I ran, I took what was called the Citizens Police Academy, which was a public process by the local police where you as a community member could go ahead and see how the police work. And frankly, I wanted to know how the police work as somebody from my political background who believes in civilian review commissions and other forms of community oversight with police. I felt like I really needed to educate myself on what it was like from their side and not just have jingoistic lefty sayings about the police without knowing what it was like. So that was another case where I made a lot of contacts and friends with people who are more politically centrist than I would have otherwise being on that, taking that school. Now, funny enough, and this is the second to last thing I'll say about the 96 campaign, I missed their invitation to come for their endorsement. I missed it. It was in my mail. I missed it. And they went ahead, went through the endorsements, and they thought I had shunned them, which I hadn't. But then when I won, it blew people away that you could get elected without the police, because people were just not getting elected before, without the police. So the police endorsed me 4 years later. So, that was a big deal. And then the other thing is endorsements in general. You need to do your research before you run about who does endorsements and what is the timeline for when they will send you a questionnaire and when you can be ready to fill out their questionnaire and get it in on time. People who run the first time and aren't familiar with that get overwhelmed. Oh my God, I'm getting this questionnaire and this one, and I don't have the time because I should be walking door to door. You need to have your act together, plan for that, et cetera. And the other thing to plan for are the candidate debates. You need to plan and have your 60-second answer. And what is your policy on housing? What is your policy on social services? What is your policy on this, that, and the other? Take your timer and do it 15, 20 times. Take a timer and just start talking about the issues you care about and see how long it takes you to do it. Stand in front of a mirror and seeing what you look like when you're doing it. You need to have that down so when you get into the candidate debates, which are important, in some communities they're televised, you need to have your act together on all of that. No gracias. So all of those are pieces that go into a campaign. And then the final thing I'll say is that 4 years later when I ran, then I had a record to run on. I was reelected with I finished first. I had the second highest vote total in the history of the city at that time. And then I carried that on to be appointed mayor. Other thing I'll touch on before we go to questions is governing. What do you do when you govern? So first thing is you need the respect of your colleagues. So it's one thing to get elected. You can't start taunting people and say, oh, I won, haha. Now you're among equals and you want their respect. How do you gain their respect? What I did, 2 things at the beginning. Number one, every meeting, you get the agenda packet with all the staff reports. I made sure I knew the material as well or better than any of my colleagues, so that when I showed up at a meeting, I wasn't shooting from the hip. It was obvious from the questions that I was asking, the comments I was making, that I knew what I was talking about. And it's a lot of work. Those agenda packets are a few hundred pages, and you get it X number of days before the meeting, and you got to do that. So I put in the time, and that meant that my colleagues respected me. The community knew what I was talking, I knew what I was talking about, and city staff. And it's really important, whatever the staff is with the local government agency that you are serving with, these people are professionals. They've spent their life, they've gone and studied, they've gotten a job, they've chosen to go into public service. And if you're not paying attention to the materials that they are that they are producing for you, you're a loser. I mean, what are you doing? And the converse is, if you're really looking at their stuff, it's a big deal and you're gaining their respect. Then what do you do with that respect? Most of the time, you're not voting on a yes, no when an item comes to your legislative body, because usually if something is making its way to the council, not always, but usually there has been some direction in the community to pursue a particular issue, like what's going to be the zoning overlay for this particular neighborhood that we're talking about. Usually there's a few community meetings, there's some direction to staff to come back with recommendations. How are we going to rezone this neighborhood to deal with quality of life issues? And therefore, when something comes to your body, if it's a city council, now you're looking at amendments, you're looking at fine tuning it. So when you're looking at the staff report and you get the staff report, now you know who community leaders are. You're calling people between when you get the report and when you have your meeting, and you're checking out with people about, well, what do you think? Should this be tweaked this way or this way? Is it missing something? Is it going too far? Etc. The second thing is, if you're going to come to the council meeting with amendments, you don't show up at the meeting and just say, oh, I want to change it somehow. Because then what happens is somebody calls up the city staff member who's presenting the staff report on this, and they're going to say, well, it's a good idea, but actually it can't work because of this, and this. You want to talk to the city staff beforehand. You want to talk to the city manager, the city attorney, whatever the issue is, and say, I'm interested in going in this direction with this agenda item. How would I accomplish that? What would be the best way to amend this proposal? And especially if it's a zoning issue where you're going to have planning staff who's probably been deeper into the weeds than you've ever been, and they can give you some feedback on how to do that properly. The other thing to do is, there are sunshine laws in all of our states where you can only talk to only a minority of the members on your body can talk together before a public meeting. If you don't do that, you're violating your Public Meetings Act, and you're essentially creating a decision with a majority outside of the public view. You can't do that. It's not okay. So then you have to think, how many people can I talk to? So on my council, 7 members, that meant 3 of us could talk together. That meant I could talk to 2 other members. Well, how do you pick those folks? Sometimes, like let's say on housing, some people are going to be with you already, and you don't have to talk to them all. Then you need to talk to people who might be swing votes. You don't have to talk to all of them, because some of you can take for granted. So you have to be strategically about that before the meeting and talk to a couple of people who are the movers, who are the people who are most likely to have the gravitas and the standing in the meeting to, if they're also supporting some kind of idea that it's going to be successful. So I did that in office, and it was very rare that I was not on the prevailing side, because I put in the time, I had a community record, I was representing things that people were for, I worked well with my colleagues, and I did my homework. And that's why I was returned to office with such an overwhelming majority in the following election. And then the final thing I'll mention in that following election, and then take a pause, we again had those luxury hotels, and we decided to work on having the first private sector living wage ordinance in the United States. And the argument there was that, and we did it with businesses over a certain size in our coastal zone. Legally in California, there are coastal zones where development in the coastal zone has to meet some other thresholds. It often goes to the Coastal Commission as well as to your local city council. And in our coastal zone is where all these luxury hotels that we gave special zoning for, and effectively they had a monopoly. And all this great public infrastructure that we had in Santa Monica, they had a monopoly from that, but they weren't paying their people well enough. So now what does that mean? That means that the money we were making on the bed tax on our hotels that was paying for our parks and police and other public services was on the back of underpaid hotel workers. That isn't okay. We don't want to have this upscale, not fully upscale, but generally upscale community in Santa Monica, and doing that by taking advantage of the people who work in our community, and have them not being able to earn a living wage. This was a big deal. This was a big fight to do this. And first, the hotels tried to pass an initiative originally that would have prevented us from able to go that route. We defeated that. Then the council approved it. Then, unfortunately, 2 years later, we narrowly lost it on a referendum because, frankly, the union didn't pick the right people to do the direct mail. And it was crappy direct mail. And we barely lost when the hotels threw in hundreds of thousands of dollars against it. But it ultimately laid out a record in our community to continue to unionize. And ultimately, we did get local living wage ordinances. And, it was something where we reached for the stars because we had already done the groundwork. And that was one of the, I was very proud of that. And the closing thing here is on that Civic Center referendum that we did in '94, that even though we didn't win that, what happened a few years later is we ended up with a 5-2 council majority. It was 3-3-1 when I got elected in '96 between left, right, and center. And then by a 1999 special election, we had a 5-2 majority. At that point, the Rand Corporation had not yet developed this enormous public area. They weren't able to figure out how to pencil their project out, which was a large commercial office and high-end housing project. So in '99, we now had some money because of the 1994 earthquake, the Northridge earthquake. We had redevelopment money from that. So I engineered the deal, and I was the leader on this, where we worked with the Rand Corporation and we worked with them to come up with their new headquarters and we moved them from in front of City Hall, where again, they would have blocked the view to the ocean and had a shadow over City Hall. And they agreed to move there. We bought 13 acres of land from them with our redevelopment money. I think it was 52 million that we spent there. And then they agreed to design their new project at a LEED, was it LEED Platinum? LEED is the high-end environmental standard for architecture. They built this world-class environmental headquarters at a much lower height. And in that public space, we built a new park, which we named after the Tongva people. It's called Tongva Park. The Tongva were the indigenous people who had lived on that land for thousands of years. So then we also changed, there was no more commercial office park, and instead they built a housing project, which was half market and half affordable. And in that we included artist live workspaces. We had affordable housing for a lot of people in the community, et cetera. So effectively, my grassroots movement work in the early 90s opposing this bad project ultimately led to my getting on the council, our movement having a majority, buying the land from Rand, and now having this amazing world-class park that was designed by this amazing world-class architect. It's gorgeous. You can now see from City Hall straight through to the ocean. And, I can go to my grave knowing that I helped deliver this literally life-changing project in the middle of our community. So I'll stop there and let's open it up to questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Okay. Questions, raise your hands or unmute if you'd like to ask a question of Mike. Margaret's raising their hand. I'm not sure. Are you raising your hand at us?
Yes.
Your hand was out of the frame. Okay. After Margaret comes Tony. Go ahead, Margaret.
And thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you really for that very thorough presentation. I have a lot of questions actually, but one of the first ones I'd like to start with is, okay, so you kind of briefly touched on this, but how like, what did you look for when you were choosing your campaign staff? Like, was there equality? Was there like you mentioned, like you need a professional person who's going to help you with your media stuff. Like, how did you pick that person? How did you find him?
Yeah. So Sharon Gilpin, in 1990, another thing I was involved with is we had a public, it was a public beach club on the beach in Santa Monica on it was state land, but Santa Monica ran this beach club, and there was a move by Michael McCarty, a very wealthy developer, who wanted to build a high-end luxury hotel on that parcel, and that went to a public vote. The movement that I was part of, and that Sharon Gilpin, who I'll mention, she was my consultant, was a leader on, and we ended up defeating that project on the ballot. And Sharon did the direct mail for that project. She did. She ran for council herself. She was on the planning commission, and she had run some different campaigns over the years for other candidates. So Sharon knew the community, number one, and she was good, and has won. And she, by the way, she lives on Bainbridge Island now, especially likes to support women candidates. So it's somebody who you might all want to check in with in the future. So Sharon was a very logical person because she had run campaigns locally, knew how to do it. We were on the same side. We had personal trust. And, she gave me a good price as well because she wanted me to win for local issues. So I was very lucky there. And then, again, Doug Heller, who I'd worked with already, who did my precinct operation, I had worked with him on our 96 convention. So, I looked for people who shared values, but also were professional in terms of they knew what to do. They really knew their stuff and would be straight with me, because Sharon would tell me when I was, candidate is the candidate. They're not the campaign manager. And I was willing to listen to her, but I was willing to listen to her in part because I'd seen her run winning campaigns, and I knew it.
Great. Let's let Stony ask a question. Go ahead. Make sure you unmute.
That's the button I need to push. You mentioned a book about the Greens in Germany, and I want to know the name.
Yes, Green Politics, The Global Promise.
Okay.
And Charlene Spretnak, who is one of our founders of the Greens in the United States, she was at the 1984 founding meeting at Macalester College in St. Paul, still lives in California, has written a lot of books on ecofeminism. The great 1987 ecofeminism conference at USC, that was one of the early Green Movement founding meetings in our country. She helped to put that together. Was married to Danny Moses for a long time, who just passed away a few months ago, who had run for lieutenant governor in California, was also one of our founders. Charlene was at the 1987, our first national gathering at Amherst College in Massachusetts. Charlene and Murray Bookchin had some very historic debates there about the direction we should go as a party. So she's a giant, and she was in Germany, spent a lot of time with the German Greens. Knew Petra Kelly very well. Petra Kelly and corresponded with her greatly. And actually, the Green History Project that I'm working on, and Margaret, I'm going to be coming to the steering committee soon to ask about where we're going to host it on the site. I actually have some scanned of some correspondence between Petra Kelly and Charlene. So that book is a must, because it really goes into what was the first time in a big way on a national level that our movement party had power and dealt with being part of a system that we wanted to be part of, but also to transform.
I've always assumed that the reason the Green could proceed in Germany was that they have this mixed partly proportional representation
Yes.
system.
Yes, mixed member proportional MMP. That's correct. Now, we won 27 seats, 8.3%. I think it was in 83 when we first entered the Bundestag there. The first Green who was elected to a parliament was in Switzerland in 79, and the next few were in Belgium in 81, but the large number was 83 in Germany. Now, the interesting thing about that dynamic is in the MMP system, you have a combination of single seat districts and proportional representation. And it's compensatory, which means, without going too much into the weeds, it means that let's say your party gets 10% of the proportional side and you win no seats in the districts, then you would get enough seats to in the proportional side to have 10% of all seats. But let's say you win some of the districts, then you would only get enough remaining seats out of the proportional to fill to that 10%. Now, what has happened in Germany is that over the years, the more that we were in the parliament through our proportional side and people started to understand that we could govern, we started winning the districts, which are called direct mandate in German. So, you know, it's an interesting connection between that because we actually can win in some of those races. Now, they don't have ranked choice voting, and therefore they're from split votes with 4 or 5 parties, just like in the UK, as you know, Jillian had the experience there where often the vote, nobody gets a majority as well. But we were getting enough to win those districts because people started to trust us with the proportional side.
I'm going to get the book.
Yeah, it's great. Absolutely great. Margaret, you had a million questions?
I do have a million questions, as a matter of fact. Some of them will be, I think, addressed a little bit later on by Jody and by Lisa, because there'll be a little bit specific to like Washington State. But okay, so sorry, so you kind of addressed like the nuts and bolts, like the, you know, like the here's how you do it kind of perspective. But I'd like to ask you a question at a bit more of a personal level. Like, you were involved at the beginning and you got, you know, you were there and you were doing all this stuff. Like, what was it like? Like, how did you recognize the historicity of the moment that you were participating in? And like, how did you feel about that? And how now, looking back, right?
The comparison I would make is that when people have a spiritual affirmation of acting upon their personal beliefs in some way that they couldn't imagine necessarily they'd be successful, but they thought they had to try, and then suddenly it all worked. You get that tingling feeling like, oh my God, really? In the real world, this wasn't just in my head. If we try, it can happen. And this was building a new party in this country. So it blew my mind. It absolutely blew my mind. And in 94, we nationally, we won a few local seats in 92, a few more in 94, and then it started to break through in 96. So I was also starting to become part of a wave, and it wasn't just happening in Santa Monica. Obviously it's the policy, and the world was ready for that policy. So it was a confirmation that the debates we had in the 1980s about should the Green movement go into electoral politics, there were a lot of people who didn't think we should. That becoming part of electoral system was going to cause us to sell out, to lose our values, etc. And we tried it, and it literally started to work. So it was an affirmation of that period in the 80s first, where should we get in? Also, it was an affirmation of starting in the bottom up, of starting in a community level and being able to win on that sort of level. So it was so gratifying. And I would say from a historical perspective that we were on the way up until 2004, because 96 Nader comes along, and he now is saying to people who were politically independent that, yeah, Ralph Nader's name at the time had not been tarnished by the Democratic attacks on him. So this was a signal to independent, progressive thinking people around the country that it's time to start doing third-party politics. So that started bringing in a whole lot of new people into our party that hadn't thought about doing it before. So the number of Greens starting to run increased. Nader 2000 happens, massive campaign. It builds on the WTO protest in Seattle, again, connecting to your state. That movement was represented by the Nader LeDuc campaign in 2000. Those people started coming into the Green Party and running in massive numbers. We kept increasing, more people were running, more people were winning. 2004, Kerry Bush and the blame on Ralph and the Green Party for 2000 in Florida, even though obviously if the Democrats had counted every county instead of just the 4 counties, as Al Gore had said, they should count every vote instead of just picking 4 counties where they thought that would make sure they'd win the vote, which allowed the Republicans to disrupt them. And thus it went to the Florida court and the Supreme Court. People wanted to blame us for it. And in the view of the 2004 election, especially after the invasion of Iraq by the United States under Bush, W, meant that there was a big backlash against us in 2004. And I think Jody will remember, God, were you a treasurer back then as well? Our money started to go down after 2004. The party was divided. Our convention in Milwaukee was bitter. There were people who were supporting David Cobb and wanted to leave the Nader time behind. Nader did not go for our nomination. He wanted to have an endorsement instead and not run on our line. There was a lot of bad feeling after 2000 between some people in our party and Ralph. And at the convention, there were a lot of people who fought back and forth. There was a famous panel discussion on Thursday night before the convention. Peter Camejo was representing Ralph on that. People were hooting and hollering at each other, and that started to divide us internally at the same time that in the public, they hit on us started to happen. So at the same time, the steering committee voted at that time to increase funding for staff. Our money started going down. It started putting us in a bad financial position. Publicly, people started to run for us less and less and less. And we didn't have the resources after having this heavenly upward movement from the mid 80s until for about 20 years, essentially from 84 to 04, we got hit in 04 and the massive public blaming of us, the endless Greens are spoilers, shouldn't do it, was really hard for us. And we've struggled in different ways since then. And then I would just add that the Sanders campaign in 2016 and 2020, especially, it took people who were in the Occupy movement who should have been ours and got them to start going into the Democratic Party, especially young progressives of color. And the Sanders movement can convince them that that's the route to go instead of with us. And we've been deeply hurt by that because now those people have to touch the stove to see that it's hot. And we've probably lost 10 or 15 years of people who could have been with us and running as Greens and instead are going to have to fail as Democrats. So that's a kind of quick historical perspective.
Thank you.
Let's see, I think Starlene wants to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks. So Mike, when you first started out, in the mid 90s, running for the first time, what was your relationship with the state party, the GPCA, and how did you feel they helped you, if they did? And what would you have, looking back, what would you have wanted from them, help from them? I mean, me as a field organizer for a state party, I want to be able to give our potential candidates and our candidates what they need. And so I'm just thinking from a candidate perspective, what do you want from the state party as far as help goes?
Yeah. So I was a co-founder. I co-chaired the founding meeting with Mindy Lorenz. I don't know if any of you knew about her, but she was awesome. She was both with the National in the late 80s and was a big founder for us. So I was really at the core of the founding process and was embraced deeply by the party. We didn't really have a lot of internal division, a few small ones at that time, but we were pretty much together. So at that time, we weren't giving any money from the state party to individual candidates, and my campaign was so strong that I didn't need it. But what would I say today for you? You would want to have sitting office holders or past office holders from around the state who are willing to spend time, not just on a Zoom like this, but to spend time with an individual candidate and brief them about it. Number two, you have a platform and you want people who are experienced on issues that the candidate maybe isn't, to work with them, who have had the chance, whether they're an expert on water conservation or on affordable housing policy. You want to put those people together and help them on policy up front as much as possible. And then if you do have a network of people who have worked on campaigns, who, you know, again, with Margaret's question about my campaign consultant, who have worked for other Greens, there's a limited number of consultants who will work for Greens because sometimes they're going to be X'd out by the Democrats if they're willing to work for a Green campaign. So who are those people? You know, are they willing to actually do that and be a consultant for a Green? Who are the people who produce the union-made lawn signs that you want to have? You know, if you're just starting from scratch and trying to find who can make your lawn signs for you, how do you do that properly? You want people who have done that before. I mean, there's a lot of very simple mechanics that if you haven't done it before, you can lose weeks trying to figure that stuff out and haven't done it before. Now, again, my friend Sharon, who lives in Bainbridge Island, is a wealth of experience, and she will do free consultations with anybody who's going to run and give them some estimate about a campaign that can fit their budget and their level. So, and then of course, if there's a Green Party membership list, you want to be sharing, you know, anybody who you're endorsing, you want to use that list to, for volunteers. So those would be some of the basics.
Mm-hmm. What's Sharon's last name?
Gilpin, Gilpin. And if you do a search for the Gilpin Group, and I'll see if I can find it here as well. Okay. She's great. And
great.
And she just knows her stuff. Let's see here.
So you would advise sort of getting a list of issue experts?
Yes.
Almost like our old speakers bureau we had for the National
Yes.
Party, like
yes.
issue experts on different issues. Okay.
Yes. Most definitely. And okay, here we go. Here's her link, which not surprisingly is gilpingroup.com, which I will put into the chat.
Okay.
There we go. You know, who's going to be honest with the people too about what their strengths. Okay, I'm looking a little wild today. I'm on my hippie backpacking trip in Mexico. I'm in the high mountains in San Cristobal de las Casas and Chiapas right now. In '96, when I ran, Linda Sullivan, who was a very important person in local politics, was on my campaign team, and she got me to cut my hair. I was heartbroken. I felt like, God, if I'm willing to do this, what's going to happen to me? And I cried literally that day after I had my hair cut. And then I went to council meeting that night. It happened to be a Tuesday. I went to the council, and Chris Harding, who was the lead developer attorney in town and who was kind of the leader of the opposition in town, he actually said, wow, anything's possible for change in our community, even Mike Feinstein cutting his hair. But I did that my first time because I didn't want my literature and my picture on my literature to lose people by my appearance. Now, when I ran in 2000, I already had a record. I tied my hair back, it was in a ponytail, and it was fine because everybody knew who I was. But starting out, you know, if you want to be hippy dippy, it's fine. I love the 60s. You know, I cried when Jerry Garcia died, but you know, you have to think about those things. And I showed up in a nice sport coat for all the candidate debates. You know,
the tie.
You know, I kind of have that. I kind of have that. I had a tie in my campaign pictures, but for the campaign debates, I had an open collar because I still had that. He's kind of cool, even though he's in the system kind of guy. You know, that's how they dress in the Knesset in Israel because they have a warm climate. So, but I mean, I had nice sport coats. My father, may rest in peace, he had passed away a few years before. We were about the same size. He was a very successful business person, left behind some very nice sport coats, and with a little tailoring, I was able to wear them. And, it just showed again that this guy's taking things seriously. Oh, by the way, I meant to mention one other thing about knowing the material, but also as a council member, you can bring forward your own policy item to the council, a council member item. And then if you can get a majority vote of the council, then you give direction to staff. Let's look into this issue. So it might be, let's look at creating a new funding stream for open space acquisition, give direction to staff to do that sort of thing. I waited 6 months before I brought my own item, because everybody was like, oh my God, this Green Party guy is on the council. He's going to have all this radical stuff. He's not going to pay attention to the, filling the potholes. So I waited 6 months before I brought my own item, even though I could have before, so people didn't feel I was exploiting the body for just my own personal political agenda, which, just like women and people of color have to go the extra mile because the system isn't fair and they have to work harder to get the same results. As a Green Party member, I had to show more than others, I wasn't a Democrat, that I was going to take the system seriously. So after 6 months, what did I bring forward as my first item? Fargo, North Dakota had just experienced their local river, I don't recall what it was called, had flooded over because this was an early climate change related massive rainfall. That was 100-year rain. And I put on an item to say, give direction to staff to start taking climate change into effect in our planning documents in town, which we had not done yet. And the editor of the local paper at that time, called the Santa Monica Evening Outlook, did an op-ed that started out saying, here's this Green Party guy and all this crazy climate change stuff, and I can't believe he's asking the council to do this. This is an op-ed that he printed. And then he said, but then I started looking into it and I read the IPCC report. And maybe he has something here, and maybe there's something we should be taking seriously. And this was a conservative guy. This guy was a Republican. And he ended up doing an op-ed saying it was okay. And part of that was because I had put in the time and didn't do this my first week. And therefore, he was willing to look, and it all worked out. So.
Okay, Stony has another question, and then I think we want to talk about supporting campaigns and any local ins and outs of running for office here in Washington. So go ahead, Stony.
I really resonated. Oh, wait a minute. I am okay. I really resonated with what you said about setting up a record before you run to office. And I've just had coffee with a guy who's in the city council of a small community up where I live, and is running for the state legislature. Well, those elections aren't until November of this year, but he had his kickoff in October of last year. Mm-hmm. And he'd been on the city council where he lives for 2 terms before that. So I guess my question is, when do you convert the preliminary laying a record stuff into a campaign, and how much before an election?
So a couple of things. First, that reminds me that you want to grab the progressive lane in your race. So in terms of when you announce, if you get out and grab that political space first, it may be the case that you scare off some other people who share your political views. Both of you may not get elected, but if you're the first person there, you've claimed that lane. So that's one thing to consider. And you need to be ear to the ground, who's singing about running, and what if I get in there first? So that's one piece with that. The second thing is, if you're going to run and win, to some degree, you need to be thinking about where's your life at 2, 4, 6 years in advance. Few people are just independent of any other responsibilities and flush with cash where they can just choose to run it on a moment's notice. So when in your life do you not have the family responsibilities? When in your life professionally can you put in this time? and think about that dynamic. So you might be running years ahead. Now, in my case, to build the local Greens, I had, in the early 90s, I had actually wanted a local female Green to be running first for city council in Santa Monica, not me. And what ended up happening, and I was going to support that person. I didn't know who it was, but that was my kind of strategic thought. I just thought that was the best strategy for us. But when I was then the community leader on this fight on our Civic Center specific plan with the RAND Corporation project in 93, 94, that was a case where reality just pushed me ahead. And I was the logical person. And the people in the movement said and came to me and said, we'd like you to run. You're the right person. So you also, we're Greens. We talk about being a movement party. What does the local movement want? Who does the local movement want? We're supposed to come out of grassroots activism and social movements. So who do they want to run? And that will also kind of help you decide if and when you're the right person to run. So then you go back to when is the time? You have to look at what are the filing dates? When do people usually declare? When are you privately going to tell the movers and shakers in the community that you're going to go for it? And then when do you, publicly do that? Because by the time you're ready to publicly do it, you need to have a lot of stuff in place already. And, that means, like, for example, if there's an organization that's going to do endorsements, do you have a strategy to get people to join that organization and be members by the date by which you have to join to be able to vote on the endorsements? When is that date? And how many friends and political allies can you get to join that? Maybe it's $20, $25 to join, but are they going to do it in time? Walk your way back from that piece so that when you do that, it's not like, oh shit, I guess I'll do it again in 2 years because it's too late to get my friends to join this time. And that when I got the SMER endorsement in 96, I had so many people who came in. I had 129, Ken Genzer had 91, and Kelly Olson had 73. So, votes. I pretty much remember those numbers from the convention. And Ken Genzer was a two-term incumbent by then already. I overwhelmed them. I had so many more people who came in, and many of them bullet voted for me as well at the convention just to get me in, no matter what. But you have to take into account all of those factors. So certainly if the filing date is, if we're talking about a municipal campaign in November, your filing dates are going to be between July and August. You need to be—
Washington, it's in May.
In May. Okay. So, you really need to be thinking 6 to 9 months beforehand. And also, if you're a good writer and you have a chance to be published, you're probably not going to get published by your local paper once you're a declared candidate. Therefore, if you're thinking about running a year in advance, you should be writing op-eds.
Okay, so great. Thank you for all that information. I know what we wanted to do right now is talk about the campaign support staff.
Thank you, Amber, by the way, just saying thank you, Amber, for putting in what the name of that river was. Great. Yeah. Okay, keep going. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you've alluded to campaign managers, all sorts of other people who have helped, in professional way that you've contracted with or had on staff. And I know we want to do a little bit about that component, like what does it take to run for office beyond a few friends? You need to have some people that are hired, some people that are contracted, all the different positions.
How many people, this goes back to how far in advance, how many people in your family, how many people you went to high school with or college or university who don't give a flying fire truck about local politics, but are friends and can give you $200. You need to think all of that out front, because you need to have some money at the start. You're going to raise money during your campaign, but you need to go in and know you've got X, and what is that number? And like, if you talk to Sharon Gilpin, she's going to give you a ballpark this is how much you're going to need to do a good direct mail campaign to get one piece out, or for your signs. And you need to start thinking about that. Now, you can give yourself a loan and then raise money against that. But what you want to be telling to people is they're giving you money because they're giving money to advance an issue that they care about. They're not doing it for you, they're doing it for themselves. And you have to get used to doing that and asking and making that pitch. And again, identifying the easy money, and then what are the official filing deadlines for campaign finance reports, and how much money can you get in before those dates, because those are going to go into the media. And that's going to be the first cutoff about who's viable. So-and-so raised 8,000 and, Radical Green there has $37 and says, I'm running a campaign on no money because that makes me pure. Well, that's, you're going to be dismissed by the local journalists and everybody else right away. So you have to think about that, those finances up front. And if you're going to be willing to loan yourself, how much can you lose if you can't raise it?
Okay, and about the specific sort of number of people in this, group of people you're going to hire, besides campaign manager and treasurer and other, maybe talk about the specific support people that were most helpful to you.
You need if you're going to raise any meaningful money, you want a professional treasurer, people who do this for a living. You cannot have mistakes. It hurts. And, there are people who do it properly and know how to do it and will know the laws in your state. So, and again, that's something when you talk to Sharon, she's run campaigns in Washington State, she'll know some of those people. So that's number one. And that's going to cost you some money. It's money well spent. You don't have the time to be your own treasurer, and you don't want the errors that come with it. And you want to meet all the filing deadlines. There's nothing worse than, 6 candidates raised this much money and candidate 7 didn't file on time. So that's number one. So the campaign manager overall, who will look at your literature and your mail and now your social media. A field operation may be different. Your people who are going to go door to door for you may be different than the campaign manager. Again, I had a door to door precinct walking coordinator who coordinated my volunteers, got my campaign signs out. You want somebody who's willing to deliver the signs, who's going to take the signs out and get them put in people's yard. So those are the campaign manager, the field person, and the treasurer are the biggies. And now, it'd be nice to have people who really know a lot about social media, because it is shifting that way.
Yes, most definitely. Okay, let's see. Holly has a question.
So just a question or comment here. To reinforce everything Mike has said about what you need and who needs to be doing what and the importance of this, but I wanted to bring up one thing, and because you're used to a larger urban area, and most of you may be hailing from there, but as you know, I'm in Iowa City, which is, there's a limit on how much people can actually donate to a campaign, and in Iowa, an awful lot of it. Now, the top tier is paid, but a lot of it is volunteer staff. So I just wanted to bring this up because in some cases, especially if in a rural area or smaller towns, you might want to think about, do people traditionally pay for these, or should you put the money toward ads or something? And I just wanted to bring that up. I think you do want to definitely budget for that if you're running in the markets like Michael was talking about, but just being in an area where nobody has ever paid for this. But you do want people who will be reliable and follow through. You want to comment on that?
There certainly may be people who are volunteers who can do a good job. It doesn't mean you have to pay for everything. Doug Heller, who did my field operation, did it as a volunteer. He had been doing grassroots political organizing in New Orleans while he was in college, and then he came home and wanted to be involved. Another thing that you have to think about are independent expenditures, or IEs, as you talk about in the industry. These are non-candidate controlled committees that are going to do their own direct mail. So the Apartment Owner Association of Los Angeles, for example, would do direct mail pieces on behalf of the center-right candidates. They do their own fundraising, they do their own endorsements, they don't coordinate with the candidates, that's illegal, but they put in a lot of money. So who is doing independent expenditure campaigns? You need to be aware of that. And then with that, there are slate cards, and this depends on where you're at. And you know, Holly's right, it's not going to happen in a small rural area, but in some of the larger areas, there are slate cards that are like, say, Citizens for Healthcare. What is Citizens for Healthcare? It's some person that has opened up a political committee and puts out a mail piece and says, we're for healthcare. And you buy to be on the literature piece. And sometimes you do that because you're not going to get the endorsement of the people who are for those issues, but you want a mail piece to be going to voters anyway. The timing to buy your way onto these slate cards is early. And you need a consultant who knows who does the slate cards, which ones matter, which ones are a waste of money, who has a good relationship to get a good price, who can get you on when there's competition for those slate cards. It's not great. It's not real grassroots campaigning. These are just money makers that affect elections, but it affects a lot of people. Nurses for, you know, whatever. And it comes out and these crappy candidates on nurses issues suddenly have a mail piece that they've bought their way on because they had money and they bought on the slate card 5 months in advance. And you, who is good on universal health care, can't get on the card because they're on it first. So that's rough and tumble politics. And a good consultant will at least be able to advise you of where to put your money and to talk to the people who say, so-and-so is going to have money by such and such a date. Please keep a spot open. Oh, and then hit pieces. They're going to be hit pieces. You might get hit with your campaign, and you have to plan for that. You may have to produce last-minute literature, which gets walked at the last minute to try and mitigate the damage. You may or may not be successful with that. There are companies that you can pay to walk literature. They have liability issues. They often can't enter a fence. If that nice white picket fence around your single family home front yard, they can't enter it because there's the danger the dog's going to bite them. So they just stuff that into the fence, or other places they can go to the door. But there are companies that will walk stuff if you don't have the time to do it right before the end of the campaign. And you might get hit, and you have to think about that.
This is a life, isn't it?
Look, politics is some of the greatest and worst parts of humanity. It really is, because power is up for grabs. And often what happens is, for 3.5 years and a 4-year term, you work with people as human beings. And then for 3 months before a campaign, it's cutthroat, all human values go out the window, and people will do anything to gain power. It's not great, but you're doing it, you know, hopefully for reasons to make the world a good place to live in. And it's worth the risk.
Does anyone have any questions more about campaign staff and volunteers and how they work together with the candidate? We wanted to make sure to answer any questions on that issue, on that topic.
I'll just comment that I've been watching a lot of Korean historical dramas. And the first thing that a new king would always do is kill off his close relatives because they were going to plot against him.
Yeah.
And we don't do that anymore, but it's
Not.
Oh, gosh. Okay, Jody has a question. Oh, unmute.
Jody,
I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the resources offered by GPUS Coordinated Campaign Committee. The last webinar that they did was on, was on early stages of organizing campaign. It hasn't yet been edited, but it has a lot of very good information, and I will put the URL into the chat. Or Holly, do you have that?
I don't, but I'm going to put I'll put the email, or put the web address here. The next one, tentatively March 29th, but it's coming through media, and there's very good presentation on press conferences. Everything from how you want to look, materials, how to reach out, managing press conferences. And so I'll put the web address and then also an email. If you want to write to us, then we can put you on our webinar announcement list.
And also there's a whole library of webinars that the Coordinating Campaign Committee, the CCC, has done, and they're invaluable resources.
One other thing to think about, since you're going to run as a Green, have your ranked choice voting is the answer to Nader's spoiler answer down, and why ranked choice voting is inclusive, empowering of all voters, because some people are going to hit you with it because you're a Green, and you got to just have it so you can say, I'm for democracy and we need to improve our system, and this is how we do it, and this is what we're for.
I do a lot of tabling for ranked choice voting, and I'm very happy to report that more and more there are people who already know it and just want to sign as a supporter. And there's also a growing group of people who have a vague idea that it exists, don't understand it, want an explanation, and then they sign.
Well, we've gone on for hour and 47 here, about probably hour and 40 something. We started a few minutes late. So I've talked a lot and probably time for me to.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Mike. You've really provided a lot of great information to us and to all the people who showed up today. And we did want to get into a few specifics about running for office specifically in Washington, because there's some unique bits to it. And if you had a chance to look at our agenda, I don't know if all of you did, but you'll see that we have allocated a little time to talk about some nuts and bolts with Lisa and with Jody regarding the ins and outs of Washington stuff, because some of it's easy for us here in terms of ballot access compared to many places. It's really easy. And then others are really specific. So on our schedule, we have our next speaker to be Jody, who would, we have talking about the ins and outs of supporting a campaign and that kind of thing like that. And then following up with Lisa, giving us 10 minutes on the nuts and bolts here in Washington. So Jody, if you'd like to take some time to talk about what it means to support a campaign and to help it be successful, that would be awesome. Thank you.
And I'm gonna take off now. My battery is just about dead.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to participate, and best of luck to all.
Sure. Thanks, Mike.
Cheers.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
Mike.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
What I want to talk about the importance of a campaign staff very briefly. It's important as a candidate to know that you can't do it all for several reasons. First of all, there are still only 24 hours in a day, despite the fact that I've been lobbying for more than that for several decades. The other thing is that no one is good at everything. And the other thing is that you need input. I mean, one of the advantages of having a campaign manager and other people around you is that someone has to be very level and clear with you and not just agree to everything you say. So you need a body of people around you for what they know and what they can do and for input. The other thing to realize is that your people serving on your campaign staff can help to grow the Green Party here. There are many parts of a campaign that you can do remotely, even if you're not in the area where the candidate is. So various people have various skills. to begin with, and also these skills can be developed so that they can be useful for other campaigns in the future. But I also think it's very good if someone who wants to be a candidate first serves as a campaign staff on someone else's campaign to get a better idea of what is involved. The other thing is, so you have the fact that the candidate really needs campaign staff for a number of reasons, that the Green Party can benefit from having campaign staff, and that the staff themselves can benefit from working on your campaign. I remembered several decades ago, there was a guy who was running as a Green, and he thought that just being a nice guy and talking to a few people was going to do it. A little more complicated than that. There is a lot of information available at the Green Party of the United States with the Coordinated Campaign Committee. And Holly put some things in the chat, but you can also go on the website and find those. So the last one they put on, which I think is very important, is the early stages of your campaign. And it talks about setting goals for your campaign, assembling resources, assembling a campaign team, planning kickoff events, developing a budget, and the campaign to-do list. Part of the reason that doing these things is necessary is because if you can't do these things, you shouldn't be running a campaign. So I should also tell you that the Green Party of Washington State has a candidate questionnaire that we send out, which is a couple pages long and has a lot of searching questions. But here again, the things that you're being asked to answer, you really should know. And if you don't know them, you should figure them out if you're going to run a serious campaign. So I suggest that that you look at the campaign questionnaire that the Green Party of Washington State has, that you check out the webinars for the Green Party of the United States, and you also look at working as a campaign worker or as a candidate as being part of the bigger picture of the Green Party, yourself, your staff, your campaign staff, and how that fits into the larger picture. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jody. I do want to be
That's
mindful of our time.
Good segue into local, our local state here. I'm going to put a link to our candidate questionnaire. So there's a blog post on our website that has all the basic call to run for office, some general overview, and a link at the bottom to the candidate questionnaire for our local Green Party of Washington. So that's a perfect place to, get, it's a good thing to fill out first if you're thinking about running, because it, prompts you to think about how what are the values that you're wanting to put forward? What are the main issues that you want to work on and address with your campaign? And that's the way that we can decide to endorse your campaign if you're running here in Washington State as a Green Party member. And beyond that, Washington State, I think the most different or odd thing about Washington State is that we can't register within a party here. We're just registered as generally registered and not identified with a political party. So the only way to identify with a party here is to join that party's structure, Green Party or other parties. And so when you, and many offices at the local level are nonpartisan, but you can declare what your preference is on the ballot if you're running for an office that's partisan. So that any higher level, state level office or higher, you declare your party preference. But the primary, as probably everyone knows, unless you're new here to Washington State, the primary is sort of an open primary where everyone's on the ballot together, and only the top two right now advance to the general election. Although there's a lot of discussion about how that can be modified with any new ranked choice voting proposals that come forward, especially on the larger elections. So as of right now, there's no ranked choice voting in the state, but there's a lot of movement to put forward different legislation that will allow local jurisdictions to utilize ranked choice voting. Stony knows a lot about that, and I know a lot of things are moving forward because things have moved forward over the last couple of years, and have progressed to a certain point where they'll be continuing to move forward. So I think that kind of gets and filing week's the middle of May for state level offices and all the state legislature. That's all the main points on local. We can let's do questions. Stony wants to bring up a point too.
I just want to mention that 2 counties in Washington state have ranked choice voting on the ballot for this November, and they are Clark County and San Juan County. They're 2 of the 4 counties that can move ahead, even though the local options bill hasn't passed. And Fairvote that I work with is focusing on the Clark County one because their ballot measure says that if it passes, they will have ranked choice voting in place by 2026. The San Juan County ballot measure simply says if it passes, we'll start using ranked choice voting as soon as the legislature passes the local options bill. So, who knows? But Clark County is really concrete, and there will be plenty of opportunities to help with phone banking, for example, if anybody wants to do that.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's see. Are there folks here who are considering? Margaret has her hand. Margaret has her hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, question. Yeah. Okay, so the filing deadline is mid-May. I know there are filing fees associated with the different offices as well. Are those standardized, or do they vary?
They're based on the compensation that each office will,
1%.
give to 1%, right? Yeah. 1% of the salary of that office.
So when I ran for Congress, the filing fee was $2,000.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow. Exactly. And so candidates can put up the money for that filing fee, or can collect petition signatures to substitute for the filing fee. And that's all explained. If you click on that post on our website, and then you click through to that Secretary of State link on the filing, there's a lot of information about, fees and how to do alternative. Basically the alternative is to collect a huge number of signatures, like 1,600 signatures for some of the bigger races.
If it's the same number of signatures as dollars in the filing fee.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Perfect.
Lisa,
Thank you.
if you're running for an office that doesn't have a salary, then there's no fee?
Oh, yeah, I think maybe not. Is that right, Stony?
So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not be.
And so you don't have to gather signatures either.
Not all of them, have, you don't get paid.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, fantastic. Y'all, we're right at our time.
Yeah.
And we managed to cover like 87% of the information on the agenda, which is pretty great. I got to be honest.
I think we did everything.
The only thing we didn't really do was Q&A with us here, I guess. But
right. Yeah. If there's any more questions, this is the time to ask. You got a minute.
I think that it would be good to know if anyone on this call is considering running for office.
Or know someone who wants to run. Yeah.
I know somebody who wants to run, but they haven't committed yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that which office might it be for?
I'm not sure. I know that they were just looking at state level offices, and so I guess it just depends on what's available.
Okay.
That was it.
Any other questions? Starlene, do you have any?
No, just if people are interested, if you got inspired by Michael, you want a little time to think about it before declaring right now, to please, get in touch with us. Our contact info is on, greenpartywashington.org, and, myself or someone else will give you a call because we want to help.
Yeah, all the contact info
I
is
have
on
a
our
lot of
contact.
cash to throw your way, but we definitely can put in people time, working time.
And I can show up in an ad and I can dab for you. You might not know what
that will totally get you.
The kids love it. It lets the youth know you're in touch with them and their values. Whatever.
Okay, well, I think we can officially end the recording of the meeting. And anyone who wants to hang out a little longer, feel free to hang out for a few minutes and we can chat. And then we'll be having a spring gathering